course that's being offered amongst the area schools. And one of the course questions asks how we can reclaim our democracy as an inclusive and humane process for all citizens. And a part of that is creating a community project. And as a group, we've decided that media and the role of media is really important to answering that course question. So I'll let Wesley speak a little bit, and then we'll talk a little bit more specifically about what we're doing.
Yeah, I'll just give just a couple comments. Been working in the city as a community organizer and in conjunction with the beloved community center. And what stuck out in my mind as this project started to form was the role of media in our immediate work, primarily with Jorge Cornell, King J, of the Almighty Man, King Queen Nation, brother over there, and just the many struggles that we've endured at not the hands of just you know about the police department, you probably know about the court systems, but something that seems to be that invisible hand is the media. And in particular to the work, something that always astounded me. I would sit at press conferences just like this, and there'd be a table out in front, and I would hear Jorge read his press statement. I would hear A.J. Blake when he had that press conference. I would hear him read his press statement. I would hear the questions being back and forth from the main media of the city. And then when I would leave out, I'd be like, man, we took off on that one. We had the truth, and we told it. And then you get out the next day and you read the paper, and you're just like, oh my. Was this the same press conference? So, we circled up in class and we said this is something that is persistent in the city. We tied it to the history of the city. And the 60s movement, and then the 69 A&T Dudley student revolt, and the 79 massacre, and the countless other struggles that have been, misconstrued by this media. And the thing about it is this, is that you really don't get to catch it. You see, when the News and Record publishes all the things that Jorge went through, they throw it on the front page, and throw probably the meanest picture that they can find, and they throw people's addresses. But you don't get to catch that because it rolls on to the next story the next day. You don't see how it's resolved. You don't see how the case got thrown out. You don't see how all of these other people were lying on him. So that's what really engages in the struggle with the media and around some particular media in this city. And I'll let Brian begin to talk about some of our ways that we plan to resolve it in our project. But that's just sort of how it came together. We talked about a lot of different things, but we saw the media being the one thing that we really need to strive and attack because that's the voice, that's what everyone picks up, and I know print media is people say print media is going out, but you know what, people still read the newspaper. And then even if they don't read the newspaper, they read, the online newspaper. So we really wanted to attack that. I'll go ahead and lay it over to Brian.
I just want to talk a little bit, some research that I did in undergraduate school as part of a class on violence. I chose my research topic, the events of November 1939, and specifically the coverage by the major city newspapers in Greensboro. And the biggest lesson that I learned from that is that the story which crystallizes in the immediate, amidst the crisis, is the one that will persist for decades. And I imagine that Reverend Johnson can attest to that, that it's within those first hours of tension and fear and anxiety that a persisting story is developed, regardless of its truth value. And the other observation is that the media operates under kind of a sacrificial logic in which an event is held up as an aberration, as an outlying event, which once identified and removed preserves the supposed purity of the system. So that the coverage of the events on November 3rd were depicted and characterized as something that occurred outside of Greensboro and happened to be within its geographic borders. That the players were outsiders, that the sentiments were outsiders, and that Greensboro would heal itself by removing any memory, frankly. And this struggle for truth and reconciliation has resulted directly, at least in part, from that story which developed. And so part of our project would be looking at local media outlets which are relatively small scale, namely the Rhino Times, for obvious reasons, because of its general slant, but because it reaches a wide audience, because it's free, and the ways in which the papers generally will make an effort to solidify the story in the early days so that the system is preserved in the long term. And so we would also hope to participate with an initiative to set up an independent media center, which would focus on what's called citizen journalism. I guess I don't really like that term necessarily, but participatory journalism, if it's a better term. So that, if I just can continue a little bit, there's at least two trends. One is the collapse of traditional newspaper making, traditional local newspapers falling apart, and related to that is a consolidation into just mega media corporations, which dominate viewers' eyes, sell readers' eyes to coalesce in a single kind of story. And the other trend, which is related, is the explosion of social media, and we saw the effects of that. I mean, I guess after the earthquake in China a couple of years ago, when individuals with cameras were able to reach the scene before the Chinese government could make a public statement about that, and that forced the issue, that forced the Chinese government to frame it in a certain way that they didn't necessarily want to. So it is important on a global level to have people who aren't writers learn to write and to report what they see. And that's
just another short little piece is that the culture of the newspaper that Brian was talking about sort of feeds itself in a cyclical kind of way. If you're familiar with the blogging culture of today, it seems that these media forms that are giving audience to the worst part of ourselves or the worst part of the culture seems to feed itself because people invite themselves to become a part, and then they have a forum, and then they have a media, then they have money, then they have backing, then they have support. And the way that, how do you confront a culture? Well, I think we have to develop our own culture and develop ourselves into that culture. So when he talks about participatory, like journalism, filming a neighborhood story, going out into your community and saying this is what is going on in my community locally, and then let's start a culture of that as opposed to a culture that is really divisive and really biased. And I think that that's what we're really standing against. And
Well, I think another important element is accountability. Whether we're holding ourselves accountable to getting the news out that we think is important, and also holding those media outlets responsible and accountable for the type of reporting that they do. And one of the cornerstones of journalism, it's not enforced by any outside body, but that they find that enlightenment and truth comes only from, or that enlightenment is the cornerstone of democracy. So enlightenment and truth in whatever method we as citizens are able to do that, I think that's important. And I think that it's important to hold each other accountable, and it's important to hold those media outlets accountable because of their pervasive influence. I mean, we don't know what impact maybe the rhino had on the election this week, but I think there was certainly something. And when we look at the rhino specifically, but I think it's much broader. I think the media resources is really important.
Thank you. Let me say thanks to everyone here, and let me give a special thanks to this marvelous class project and the work that you're doing, because it is a kind of pointer to future possibilities. We love to see similar setups on every college campus throughout the state, because we have to develop something alternative to what we have now. So thank you very much, and let's